Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 24th of April 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Well, Brexit, Mike, without the exit.
Well, indeed. We're starting with Brexit and all the mainstream media. I've chosen Sky News here, but all the mainstream media making a huge deal of the fact that Treason May suffered 3 losses yesterday in the House of Lords. Sky News here saying headline is Treason May defeated 3 times in one day on flagship Brexit bill. This is the EU withdrawal bill, the so-called. Anyway, it said that's completely gone out of my head. It said they say the most significant will see human rights laws to protect EU citizens maintained after the transition period ends at the end of 2020. That Lords voted 316 to 245 on Monday afternoon to amend the government's flagship Brexit bill so that it includes the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. The Charter protects political, social and economic rights, the Sky News says, and so it goes on. Now, you know, I'm just going to remind everybody that if you didn't see yesterday's news programme, we discussed this business of the House of Lords. Brian, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts that you wanted to add to that, but really the point here is that this has been a long-standing British government policy to get rid of the House of Lords in its original form. The first step to getting rid of it in its original form was to get rid of the majority of hereditary peers and replace them with this sort of halfway house cronyism situation where, you know...
It was politicised.
Well,
really.
It was politicised. Peers are appointed, they're not elected. This is the fundamental part of the argument. But where I'm coming from here is that we need to move back to the original concept of the House of Lords and not head towards what Tony Blair, Theresa May and David Cameron in the middle have all been campaigning for, which is a fully elected House of Lords where you end up with a whipped chamber, just like the House of Commons. Yeah. This effectively would put nothing in the way of this extreme form of government that we have in this country at the moment.
House of Lords is a bit of a conundrum, Mike, isn't it? Because many people would say, well, what right are these people with all their privileges, what right have they got to sit in the House of Lords? So traditionally a lot of people, wealthy, landed people, but somehow it seemed to work. Somehow that organisation seemed to step back from the angst of politics in Westminster and reflect on what the policy is or what the law coming through was and make some sensible decisions. And it's been attacked and attacked and attacked, and there's a reason for that the House of Lords has often blocked the government from taking policy where it wants to go. So Tony Blair coming in there, I think, was a big key to where they wanted to go. Well,
absolutely, and you've made the key point there is that it was never a political institution. No. And that's the key point. So anyway, Michel Barnier, the lead EU negotiator, he didn't say this. I've put the wrong slide in here, or at least I haven't updated the caption on it, so apologies for that. He was talking yesterday in Germany about the Brexit process, and he was basically saying that the UK side of the argument lacks clarity. He said that the UK needs to confirm or adapt its red lines because he doesn't really know what's going on. He said the EU's heads of state and government have shown their high level of ambition for the future relationship, taking account of the UK's red lines. This future relationship should of course cover solidarity in terms of security and defence. The next steps will therefore not come from the EU. Stakeholders, business, society all know where the EU stands. It's up now to the UK to come up with a vision for the future, which should confirm UK's red lines or adapt them. This is true of the future relationship. It's also true for issues of the withdrawal, such as Ireland and Northern Ireland, which we have done our share of the work. Once we have more clarity from the UK, we'll prepare a political declaration on the framework for the future relationship to accompany the withdrawal agreement in the autumn. He went on to discuss the situation with the Court of Justice. He said without agreement on governance, he's moving on to trade here and saying without agreement on governance, there's no credibility for any future treaty for stakeholders or for business. And he said that the UK needs to avoid being undercut by unfair competition. There will be no ambitious partnership without common ground on competition and state aid, social and environmental standards, and guarantees against tax dumping. So he's saying the only option is for a frictionless relationship with the UK would be a Norway Plus model. And this would be a partnership under which the UK would continue to apply EU rules and guarantee free movement like Norway does, and also form a customs union with Brussels. Well, at this point, Theresa May, as we know, is saying that there will be no customs union with Brussels. But of course, as he points out, the Northern Irish border issue continues to rumble on with no apparent resolution. So, as you said at the beginning of the programme, Brian, Brexit without the exit?
More Brexit without the exit. It staggers on. It's too difficult. This country can't really survive without the European Union. We must look after the European Union. We must keep the defence going. We must keep the security policies going. We must keep the defence integration. But we are leaving.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, Liam Fox was speaking in the City of London yesterday on international trade, because of course part of the scam of Brexit is hashtag Global Britain, and a big question mark is what will the future trading relationship be with the EU? What will this future trading relationships be with other non-EU countries? And particularly, what will the dispute resolution situation be? Because as Barnier says, he would expect a role for the European Court of Justice. Theresa May says, well, no, we'll find some other dispute resolution mechanism. And I'm saying, well, perhaps we're going to end up with something that looks very like the dispute resolution mechanism that we had, that was being proposed under TTIP. But anyway, getting back to Liam Fox, he was speaking to financiers in the City of London, as I say, and he said that the government is committed to removing barriers to international trade and to the liberalisation of trade around the world. He said we have unprecedented opportunity to create a trading environment that delivers for our country, our businesses and our citizens. So that's fantastic. But what he did say was that really the UK, the foremost champion of the world of free trade, is mainly focusing on financial services and so on. We're a post-industrial economy.
Yes, that's very true, Mike.
Yes, and therefore, being a post-industrial economy, we have to focus on services, and particularly financial services, because with 80% of GDP or exports being services rather than manufacturing, we need to focus on that. But fintech and other financial services, that is where he sees the future of the UK.
It's remarkable, this man sort of back in the public limelight. Several people in our chat box are saying, how is it that this man is on the international stage again? Obviously, he was disgraced, having taken one of his aides around the world and into meetings as if he was cleared to go into those meetings, I believe, if I recall correctly, as a sort of Ministry of Defence advisor. So lots of questions asked. He's pushed aside. He goes into the wilderness for a couple of years and then back he is with the same sort of policies. Somebody asks, is he still with Atlantic Council? I don't know the answer to that, but we'll find out.
Okay, defence, and well, we're setting up, or we have set up, a new submarine delivery agency, apparently, because we now need a government agency to deliver submarines. Brian,
yeah,
good, isn't it? The SDA, the Submarine Delivery Agency, will procure and project manage the construction of future RN submarines, Royal Navy submarines, and support those in service, working with the Navy Command and the newly established Defence Nuclear Organisation. The vision of the SDA is to lead a high-performing industrial enterprise to deliver and support UK's submarine capabilities safely, securely, and more effectively and cost efficiently. So this is fantastic stuff. It's going to be headed by a chief executive, of course, because what this really is privatisation, and who has a wealth of experience in delivering complex private and public sector procurement programs, and it's going to employ around 1,300 people. Apparently, they've learned from other successful programs of a similar scale and complexity, such as the 2012 Olympics and Crossrail.
Well, it's remarkable, Mike, that as Britain's armed forces are absolutely decimated, it takes a local newspaper, the Plymouth Herald, to talk about the lack of trained engineers, intelligence people the lack of spares, equipment, the fact that the submarine fleet has been hardly been able to put a vessel to sea for some time. The same with Britain's surface fleet. How do we cope with that? We bring in a new organisation.
Yes.
So,
but I mean, this can't be right, because Gavin Williamson here said a Royal Navy submarine is on patrol 24 hours a day, every day of the year, protecting our way of life.
Yes, that's interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, what he's really talking about is the deterrent submarines, and that's actually true that they've managed to keep one of those vessels. But when we come into our hunter-killer fleet, which is the fleet that should now be at sea if there's such a grave threat with the Russians, of course, there's major problems, but nobody wants to talk about it. And I'll just add that a couple of people have said to me, Brian, as an ex-service person, how can you talk about this when men and women are at sea trying to do their job? My reply to that is, I think I have a duty to expose what is really going on around Britain's armed forces, and the fact that the lives of young men and women are being put at risk by the cuts that the British government is carrying out via the back door. So somebody's got to report the truth about what's happening in the military, and we're certainly not going to remain silent in order to toe the British government line.
And of course, it's not just the cuts that's putting people's lives at risk, it's also the war drums.
Well, it's also the war drums, absolutely. Well, change of subject, but if we've got money for bombs and bullets, particularly in Syria, of course, the NHS under grave threat. Now, a lot of people have contacted us about this story of young Alfie, and I'm going to say that we haven't been able to do a lot of work on this at the moment. And if in our audience we've got people who've got first-hand knowledge of this case, we'd like to hear from you. But what I've just picked up on in this as a starter on the case is the judge's words. The judge dismissed the defence barrister's application, saying it amounted to a last-ditch appeal. Alfie is a British citizen. He's undoubtedly habitually resident in the UK. He falls therefore under the jurisdiction of the High Court. And the High Court might absolutely not interested if there are other facilities around the world who think they could help this child.
Right, so just to explain this a little bit, it is a child in hospital on a life support machine, and the life support machine was to be switched off. It was in fact apparently switched off, and the doctors had said that Alfie would pass within about 3 minutes of the life support machine being switched off. The father was on the radio this morning making the point that Alfie continued to breathe unaided. He was not breathing efficiently, but he was clearly capable of sustaining his own life without the aid of life support. But as he was clearly, as time went on, increasing distress, the father managed to persuade the doctors to put Alfie back onto an oxygen supply at the very least. And so this case goes on. In the chat box, they're saying there's another court hearing for Alfie at 3:30 this afternoon. The Pope has got involved in this, offering support. The Italian government has made Alfie an Italian citizen, so he now has dual citizenship. And the parents, of course, want to take Alfie to Italy, where they can get alternative treatment. But the British establishment and the courts don't seem to want to allow that to happen for some reason.
No, this is one of the key. We are seeing so strongly, Mike, that parents are not really there to look after their children. That's a function for the state. If the state thinks particular action should be taken, the state makes that happen.
Yes.
And of course, we've got a guardian for this little baby speaking in the baby's best interest. But of course, we see this across many, many cases. Parents, what did that Scottish Member of Parliament say? Parents will also have a role in bringing up their children. Those words so true. So very dangerous things going on in the NHS. And
look, just before we move on from that, I just want to read an email that I got in just before we came on air from one of Alfie's supporters. It said, please check out Alfie's army. Alder Hay is trying to euthanize the little boy, and so on. It says there's a complete media lockdown on the case. They've been through the courts to the Vatican. They took them off life support, saying he was brain dead and he'd die after 3 minutes. That was yesterday. They were trying to give him drugs, apparently. They gave him another 24 hours at that point. Alfie's army apparently stormed the hospital at one point. This is his supporters. Received quite a lot of abuse in response. So there is clearly a lot of public interest in this case, and quite a lot of opposition to what the courts and the hospital are trying to do here.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're well aware of problems in the NHS, and we'll just say that is why we've set up the NHS conference, the health conference, Albert Hall, Nottingham, on the 12th of May. Speakers, very brave speakers, people with experience of the NHS system who are prepared to come forward and speak publicly about what is happening. And we see this as being the first of two conferences. So this one starting to lift the lid, looking at what's happening, looking at policies, looking at privatisation, with comments from people who are experienced in the NHS themselves. And we would very much like to follow this with a second conference where we're getting into much deeper areas where people have experienced very tragic cases, either themselves or for relatives, families and friends, and what has actually happened in those cases, what's happened around the subject of forcible vaccination, for example. So it's really up to our audience to help make this work. Tickets are still available. We want to really boost the numbers. So if you haven't got a ticket for this conference yet, please get online to the UK Column website and book one, and encourage other people to attend. It's our NHS, and at the moment it is within a gnat's whisker of being privatised. Well, the safety of children, always an important subject for parents at least. But let's get into what's been happening in UK around child abuse. We just remind people that this sort of headline has been very prevalent over the last few years. Telford grooming gang, police officer disputes sensationalised fears up to 1,000 girls sexually abused. And with many of these grooming gang reports, the headlines, the headline is always implying that it's the Asians. Now, we're going to say, well, not quite. And let's have a look through this report, which I think starts to take us into what's really been happening in the world of child protection. Here's the question: what happens when the child abusers run social services? Now, many people will think this is just simply not possible, but it's something that the UK Column has been talking about for many years. And we are now starting to see proof that what we've been saying is true. So here's the Mirror. Telford sex scandal shock as social services chief is one of 3 councillors exposed as paedophiles. So here we are, no messing around. We've got somebody in the system for child protection who is an abuser. Who would this man's friends be, Mike? Who would they be? Well, they're likely to be other abusers, because that's the way it works. And they are going to be working in networks in order to find and procure children.
They may have favourite colours of purple and green, perhaps.
They might have favourite colours, indeed.
Yeah.
So let's put a little bit of this article together in slightly simpler way than just the text. And so here's Graham Bold, 60. And the first part of the report is that he was former chair of Shropshire County Council Social Services Department, 1993 to 1998. He is involved in an assault on a boy aged 15. Bold actually received a non-custodial sentence for this, 12-month community rehabilitation order at Wolverhampton Crown Court in 2001. So you are there in the prime job of protecting children. You betray the children, you betray your code of office, but that's not enough to send you to prison, Mike.
No.
Remarkable. Then we've got this gentleman, the Reverend Michael Keane, 78, an Anglican vicar, former clerk to Sheriff Hales Parish Council, and he was also sitting on the West Mercia Police Authority Board. That'll be pretty handy because he's got a finger in the pie as to what may be happening around investigations with other paedophiles.
Particularly in these days of multi-agency approaches.
Indeed. Well, he did actually receive 15 months for 2 assaults on a boy aged 15. I believe this is the same boy, but it wasn't entirely clear to me from the Mirror article, so I encourage people to go and look at it. We've also got mention of this man, Graham White, former parish councillor, Madeley, near Telford, and he was done for 4 counts of indecent images of a 14-year-old girl. So we've got a mixture of the head of social services. We've got somebody in the church, but is also sitting on a police authority board, and we've got somebody in the local council as well. This is quite an interesting network. And let's put this one in. Bald was in charge of social services at a time when, quote, child sexual exploitation in the town was rife. So this is going right back to 1993. This is well pre much of the talk about Asian gangs. And I am not saying that Asians have not been involved in the abuse of children. What we're really looking at is what people were in charge of the child protection system. So let's have a look at what the paper also went on to say. It said that 2 whistleblowers were punished after speaking out about child sexual exploitation. And this is the message that UK Column has had over nearly 10 years, that people who blow the whistle on child abuse are then targeted themselves by the local authority, by the police, by child protection agencies, and of course John Wedger, Metropolitan Police Detective, blew the whistle on the cover-up of child abuse in London. He was targeted by the Met Police, he was hounded by the Home Office, he had no help at all from any of the authorities that should have been there to help him. So this sounds to be part of the course. Police chaplain, excuse me, Keith Osmond Smith was suspended after he passed over files on ongoing abuse. So this is another connection with the police, a police chaplain. He's working on the inside as an abuser, and he's handing over details of ongoing cases. Then a concerned employee was forced to resign from a post with a local counselling service after speaking out. So is that a charity, a local counselling service, do we think? Possibly. Possibly, yeah. Counselling service, possibly working with the local authority. Somebody says there's child abuse going on, they're forced out of their job. Victims of grooming and their families claim they were told not to talk to our investigators, that's the Daily Mirror team, or to contribute to our probe. And this is the experience that the UK Column has had time and time again, that people coming to us say that they were warned off talking to the media. And of course, what does that do? Keeps them quiet, means the children can be taken out of the public limelight. West Mercia's Police and Crime Commissioner John Campion emailed the Home Office to say he didn't believe a specific Telford inquiry was necessary after he'd publicly suggested he'd support one. So that's a pretty devious piece of work there. Why would you do that, Mike?
Cover up.
Cover up, yeah. And campaigning MP Lucy Allen was told she could not address a crucial council meeting which was considering whether to hold a formal inquiry into child exploitation, but the council relented after a public backlash. Ms Allen was allowed to speak at the meeting 9 days ago, and the authority voted unanimously to hold an investigation. So what we can see in that last sentence is the power of public opinion. So what did Treason May have to say? Well, she said, I think we've all been shocked by the horrific case that we've seen in Telford of some of the most vulnerable in our country being preyed upon by ruthless criminals. Sadly, of course, this is not the first example that we've seen taking place across the country. And she went on to say, I'm pleased that the Telford authorities are now going to conduct an inquiry. It's important that it begins its work in order to get to the truth and does that as quickly as possible. I've added there that central government will shut it down as we did with Met Detective John Wedger if they get too close to the truth, because that is the truth of what central government does. If anybody is beginning to get to the heart of the child trafficking rings in this country, we are talking at high level establishment, we're talking high level political rings around Westminster. Any time information points in that direction, it's shut down. So what does happen when the child abusers are running social services? It's a sweetie shop, Mike. They've got access to unlimited children, and the moment children are taken from their families and put under the so-called care of social services, not even local councillors are able to ascertain within their own councils what has happened to the children. It's a complete secret society. And let's remind people, and you've quite rightly picked up on this, Mike, that we have no separation of powers in child protection. So every area has a safeguarding team. This is for Telford. And if you look at the list of names here, you'll see that we've got the people in the senior jobs, adult social services, child social services in the council. We've also got the police, all sitting in the same meetings. So they're all culpable, Mike, when something goes wrong. So what are they going to do? They're all going to defend each other's backs. And if we go on with the list, I encourage people to look at it to see the sheer number of people that collude supposedly to protect children. And of course, over here, we've got CAFCAS. And my point is here that the protection, in inverted commas, continues into the court, where CAFCAS is going to be providing a solicitor, so-called guardian ad litem for the child.
And CAFCAS is supposed to be independent from all the other agencies?
CAFCAS is supposed to be completely independent, but are they really? So let's have a look at this. This is an email that was sent through to us this morning, and we'll just read you a little bit of it to show that it's not just Telford. So this is an email sent to the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police. It says, "Dear Chief Constable, this email categorically states that you, as responsible for South Yorkshire Police, must be held personally accountable for allowing child abuse to continue, ignoring video and sound recordings of child abuse, doing nothing when provided with a recording of a father threatening to, quote, slit the throat of a child like a cat, lying to those reporting these crimes, failing to respond when evidence produced demonstrated fraud, even when determined by a court, lying about age-inappropriate sexual material given to the children and returning the device to the perpetrator, but not before the contents were downloaded, distributed and kept in safe places, failing to respond when the perpetrator was recorded admitting lying to the police about theft of a phone so as to cover up evidence, failing to prosecute when the perpetrator took charge of children while still on a barred list for serious sexual assault, failing to prosecute the local authority as part of the Safeguarding Sheffield Children's Scheme for arranging this to happen, failing to react appropriately to the MIC report, National Child Protection Inspections, South Yorkshire Police, 12 to the 22nd of May 2014. You've also failed to comply with the Freedom of Information Act and are therefore in breach of Section 77. Finally, it ends, your Detective Constable Givens has been consistently dysfunctional when provided with evidence of child abuse, which is ongoing. So that's an email sent. Oh, sorry, Mike, let's just bring the gentleman on screen. Here's Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police. It's taken a member of the public to challenge him publicly with those accusations. And of course, this is a mirror image of what's happening in Telford. So let's come back to Telford. Now, what's very, very interesting is the local council has said it is going to do the inquiry. Now, many people might be suspicious of this, but information we've been receiving over the last few days says that for the first time, local people are seeing a real intent within their own council to get to the bottom of what's happened. And certain key councillors, I think, are outraged at the fact that their reputations have been sullied by the cover-up of this abuse and the involvement of other councillors in the abuse. So the word that I'm receiving is that this is a powerful change, that people locally saying, no, we don't want the government to do it, we are going to investigate. And this reminded me a little bit of Fresh Start north of the border, which of course David Scott and the others have been pushing forward.
Okay, let's have a look at mainstream media and the state of mainstream media. This is Owen Jones, who of course writes for The Guardian, and he pushed this tweet out a couple of days ago, saying, the main thing I've learned from working in the British media is that much of it is a cult, afflicted by suffocating groupthink, intolerant of critics, hounds internal dissenters, full of people who made it because of connections and or personal background rather than merit. So he pushed that out and got quite a response, such a response that he's put a post on Medium. The post is called "The British Media is a Closed Shop. These are the Facts." And so, as I say, it began when he pushed that tweet out. It received such a response. And he said that, journalists from publications across London were outraged, apparently, by what he said. One reporter said that no one tells me what to think. He then goes on to talk about what's known as the huddle, which he says is when reporters get together after Prime Minister's questions or other media events frequented by lobby journalists to decide what to say or write about. Lobby journalists, he says, will often stand together and or walk back to the press lobby together and agree what just happened before they go to press.
So they weren't sure themselves. They attended an event, but they weren't bright enough to understand what.
No, I think it's much more devious than that, because of course these people are all supposed to be working for competing media outlets. But what in fact they're doing is getting together like some kind of cartel and deciding what the line is before they all go to press, to make sure that when they do all go to press, they're all going to press with the same point of view, the same position. He says other ways the huddle, he calls it groupthink, takes place in the media is through peer pressure. He said that he included a comment from the right-wing blogger Paul Staines. There is, for example, peer pressure on how hacks do not rock the boat, even if that pressure is applied by exasperated collective groan from other reporters if someone asks a dissonant question. I strongly recommend, rare that I would ever say that anybody should read anything that Owen Jones has written, but I do strongly recommend that people read this.
Of course, I'm going to say he's a very young man. He certainly was when he started to dip his toe in the political arena. So I can imagine there are a lot of things that he had preconceived ideas about how the media worked and what it was all about. And presumably he's now out of the frying pan into the fire, and he's discovering that it's not quite as straightforward as he thought.
Well, yeah, but equally what we're seeing here is massive infighting. So there's clearly a huge amount of tension and pressure within the system as well.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, Polygon reporting that YouTube networks are dropping thousands of creators as YouTube policy shifts. Now, this is about multi-channel networks. This is basically because a lot of small YouTube creators, in inverted commas, in order to sign up for access to ads on YouTube, it's quite an onerous process. And in order to sort of shortcut that, they get together with these so-called multi-channel networks, and it's the multi-channel network itself which makes the revenue sharing agreement with YouTube, and then the multi-channel network distributes that revenue amongst the people that have signed up to it. But what's happened now is that these multi-channel networks are finding that YouTube is coming to them and saying, you're representing channel X, Y, and Z. We don't like channels X and Y, so please drop them immediately. And the multi-channel networks are finding that they're being forced to drop them, and therefore those channels are suddenly fighting themselves without revenue. So this is just another area where YouTube is beginning to strongly censor dissenting voices.
In line with government policy.
Absolutely. Brief reminder, a media on trial in Leeds, 27th of May. Get along to that if you possibly can. It is more needed than ever. Details on mediaontrial.uk. Now, we missed this a week or two ago. Well, this is from the 11th of April, and it's from Invest in Manchester. GCHQ to create hundreds of jobs in Manchester, new intelligence facility. So they say hundreds of jobs are to be created in a cutting-edge new GCHQ intelligence facility in Manchester, capitalising on the region's digital technology talent pool and strength in cybersecurity. So the site's due to open in 2019, and it will extend the network of sites in the UK operated by GCHQ, which currently has offices, aside from the headquarters in Cheltenham, also has offices in Cornwall and in Scarborough. And last year, they say the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of GCHQ, opened new headquarters near Victoria and London. So they're strongly recruiting at the moment. Jeremy Fleming, who's the director of GCHQ, said, "I'm delighted we're opening a new site in the city of Manchester. It will create hundreds of high calibre jobs for people who will have a vital role in keeping the country safe." Well, I feel safer already, Brian.
Well, I don't, Mike, I have to say. I absolutely don't, because it's quite clear to see that this is more apparatus for spying on the citizens of UK. So where does it lead to? Well, I think it leads somewhere in this direction. Now, several people picked up on this article, but I wasn't able to cover it a couple of days ago. US government accidentally sends a strange conspiracy theory file describing remote mind control and forced memory blanking. The find was made by a reporter investigating far-right and right militant groups. Washington State Fusion Center included the files in its response to his inquiry. A compressed file detailed research into bizarre psychoelectronic weaponry. They claim to use electromagnetic forces to induce a number of strange effects. That includes inducing intense feelings of pain, as well as remote brain mapping. This was an amazingly crafted article, Mike. Just the US government accidentally sends a conspiracy theory file. Would that be fake news?
I'm not quite sure. What are they actually trying to say here? Are they saying that the file is written by conspiracy theorists, or are they saying that the contents constitute conspiracy theory? What exactly are they saying?
Well, what exactly are they doing? Let's have a look and see where we could get to with this one. So this is Tim Collins. This is the guy who wrote it, and should have been able to call those up a line at a time. Let's start at the top. What does he do? Well, I've put that the Daily Mail is effectively spinning psychoelectronic warfare into UFO conspiracy. So this journalist simply fails to investigate the subject. He doesn't discuss the case with any credible scientist or researcher. Instead, he turns to some pretty alternative people. So he suppresses the story with supposition. The presence of these records doesn't mean that the US government is directly working on such projects, or that they are anything more than thought experiments.
Right.
So now we see that actually we've got a US government department releasing this material, but he says, well, they've released it, but it doesn't actually mean they're working on it.
But he didn't bother to try to find out?
No, he didn't bother to find out.
Right.
Then he discredits the story using UFOs. So this is what's in the article. Nigel Watson, author of the Haynes UFO Investigations Manual, said, in the past, CIA conducted Project MK Ultra, which featured numerous mind control projects. Most of them involved the use of drugs like LSD for interrogation purposes or for the purpose of mind control. Millions of dollars poured into the project with few practical results. So now we've got the double spin, because we're talking about real projects by the military to play with people's minds, but you've linked it into the author of the Haynes UFO Investigations Manual. This is very clever journalism. He then spins the story by the use of conspiracy theory at the very end. So he ends the article, they certainly add to the paranoia of conspiracy theorists who believe these and HARP weapons are used to create UFO sightings and make people believe they've been abducted. Rumour of governments experimenting with psychoelectronic weapons have long abounded among conspiracy theorists. So the US government department releases these documents talking about its experiments with psychoelectronic devices. And by the end of this man's article, with no proper research or evidence, he says it's conspiracy theory effectively linked to UFOs. Well, what sort of journalist is he? I love going to their Twitter pages. This one was in the top 3 tweets. And for me, it did it because he thinks this is very important. Baffled doctors discover a Portuguese woman has 2 anal canals. Now, I'm not making this up. Is this really the state of this man's mind, Mike? He describes himself as a science and tech reporter by day, a general geek by night. Well, to me, this is puerile stuff. So what didn't he look at? Well, if we jump back to the Washington Post, the Washington Post had some very different things to say in 2007. So it said this: articles culled from military journals and even some declassified national security documents that do seem to show that the US government has attempted to develop weapons that send voices into people's heads. And on it goes. The thing that's missing from his bag, now this is a gentleman who said that they are doing this and had produced evidence for the reporter. The thing that's missing from his bag is even a single document that would buttress the implausible notion that the government is currently targeting a large group of American citizens with mind control technology. So this journalist said, I accept they're playing with the technology, but what you haven't given me is any evidence that they're actually using it on the wider public. Well, that was true, but in their next sentence, they said this: in 1965, according to declassified Defense Department documents, the Pentagon, at the behest of the White House, launched Project Pandora, top secret research to explore the behavioral and biological effects of low-level microwaves. For approximately 4 years, the Pentagon conducted secret research, zapping monkeys, exposing, quote, unwitting sailors to microwave radiation, and conducting a host of other unusual experiments. A sub-project of Project Pandora was titled Project Bizarre. So they were prepared to use this on unwitting military people. Is it beyond possibility, Mike, that they would be prepared to use this on the general public as they did with various nerve agents? Same was happening in UK. Well, he continues here. An academic paper written for the Air Force in the mid-1990s mentions the idea of a weapon that would use sound waves to send words into a person's head. And we'll end here. In response to a Freedom of Information Act request filed for this article, the Air Force released unclassified documents surrounding that 2002 patent, records that note that the patent was based on human experimentation in October 1994 at the Air Force lab, where, quote, scientists were able to transmit phrases into the heads of human subjects, albeit with marginal intelligibility. So remarkable that the Mail journalist couldn't do some research like this, Mike. But this was the fascinating thing. This is the department that released those papers talking about electronic weapons, the Washington State Fusion Center. So there's the mission. And what have we got? The mission is to support the public safety and homeland security missions of state, local, tribal agencies and private sector entities. So this is about bringing departments together to fight crime and terrorism.
With the private sector, I note.
With the private sector.
Yeah.
Here's objectives. Let's bring that up on screen. Detect, deter and prevent terrorist attacks. Detect, deter and prevent significant criminal activity. Who defines that? Perform threat assessment, information management services, including supporting the protection of critical infrastructure, hazard preparation, planning, response. Serve as the state's single fusion center provide cyber security awareness. So I thought, how remarkable, Mike, that only a couple of weeks ago we were reporting on the UK's fusion doctrine. This you took us through. And Treason May has suddenly come up with her own fusion initiative. Yes. What a remarkable coincidence, isn't it? Just remarkable. So a review and her solution to what she says is increased threats from right-wing extremism, terrorism, instability is a fusion centre. So there we are, the National Security Capability Review. Sorry, we'll jump through this if we can.
Yeah. So we're taking a comprehensive approach to tackling the evil ideology of extremism, as you say, establishing a new intelligence framework, make community engagement a cornerstone of the response, national resilience is collective. So this is exactly the same thing, isn't it?
This is the American model, and I think that this is the American model. So what we see in the USA and the UK is more state spying.
So I think we'll end with this one, Brian. The Alternative View conference taking place the 4th of May to the 7th of May at Horwood House Hotel near Milton Keynes. Details are at alternativeview.co.uk. Still some day tickets only available left, no residential tickets left. And you will be speaking at that.
Indeed. Well, I think, as always, it's going to be a very good event, and those tickets, the full conference tickets, went extremely quickly. So I think we have to say to people, if you want a day ticket, you can still get that. If not, you're going to have to wait till next year.
Yeah.
That's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. If you're not already a subscriber of UK Column, please subscribe. We can only do what we do with your financial help. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.